announced, I think we should give him credit. He gets a Nobel Prize or not, I don't know. I mean, they gave a Nobel Prize to Churchill and didn't give it to Gandhi, so I don't know how they figured this.
They also gave it to Barack Obama before he had actually done anything.
All right, still ahead on Morning Joe. We're going to get
Not
Steve
that Donald
over.
Trump noticed that.
No, I just need to underscore what an enormous moment this is for so many people in this region, for the people of Gaza who have endured 2 years of war, for the families of these 48 remaining hostages who have endured 2 years of absolute agony. This is a watershed moment.
Well, following up on our coverage yesterday of the Gaza Peace Plan that Trump has successfully brokered phase 1 of between Israel and Hamas, which of course includes a ceasefire in the southern portion of Gaza, needless to say, the liberal media is having a really hard time grappling with this. They have had to go from the stages of denial to grief to outright acceptance in the span of 24 hours, because after all, we understand this is difficult for them. The more mainline liberal figures do not want to give Trump credit for anything, obviously. But furthermore, you also got to look at the harder left progressive Palestine activists who, on top of being anti-Trump, are really struggling right now with the idea of, what are we going to grift off of now? What are we going to performatively scream at Jerry Seinfeld and random celebrities about? And how is it, by the way, that our years of putting on Taliban headscarves and doing these ridiculous performative stunts had absolutely no effect on anything? But how is it that when an actual man of historical consequence and action, not some career moralist or perpetual virtue signaler, but a real guy who does things, comes along and we were against this guy, but he did exactly what we were asking for the longest time, they're scratching their head. They're struggling to deal with, frankly, how insignificant and small they actually are in the face of greatness. That's why they're, by the way, screaming, oh, Trump may have finally gotten it done, but he's still bad because the war went on for 6 months or this or that, or, he still supports Israel. Shut up, Mehdi Hasan. All you freaking progressive Palestine characters, you're being called out. You've been totally smashed in the fact that you realize, you're wrong about everything. You don't understand things. And, needless to say, turns out the quote unquote pro-peace president that you keep on claiming is actually pro-war is exactly what he was claiming he is. So that said, guys, we'll tell you all about it in today's video. I want to show you some of the reactions of liberal media from start to finish, right? At the point where they're like, no way this can be real, to finally they realize it's real and say, with very cold faces, look, we got to give Trump credit. Look, he did something really impressive here, which he did, by the way. He basically brokered, understand this, guys, he brokered a peace deal between, first of all, Hamas, which is an Islamic terror organization, and Benjamin Netanyahu, who is arguably the biggest expansionist neocon in the world. So it's actually a miracle in a sense, right? How do you get a neocon in an Islamic terror organization, career enemies for decades, to agree to stop fighting? Because he did a very significant thing here. And that's what some people are struggling to grasp, and that's what some people are finally now being forced to accept in the media. That said, guys, do us a favor if you enjoy our content. Make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is the best way to support our work and ensure that we can keep doing these videos. And that said, let us start with a timeline here last night when CNN finds out about the first brokering of phase 1 of the peace deal, and they don't really want to admit that it's actually happening. Take a listen.
Obviously, blessed are the peacemakers indeed, but it is worth pointing out this is a ceasefire deal, right? This is not a larger peace deal about a Palestinian state of any sort and who gets to rule a Palestinian state and Israel gets security guarantees, how, and all that. That is still TBD, right?
I mean, yes, but, because the yes, but part of that is that, yes, this is the first phase of this deal where the two key parts of that was a ceasefire and the release of the hostages and also the release of Palestinian prisoners that are being held in Israel.
Can't these people just be happy for 1 second? By the way, I understand it's a process, okay? They're not factually wrong that there's still a lot of work that has to be done in the reconstruction. And yes, it's true to the critics that there is no saying that the deal won't immediately get violated and the war starts over again. I do think that parts of the peace plan try to set up the incentive structure, and this is why it's smart so that that does not happen. On one hand, Hamas has agreed to relinquish power and governance in the Gaza Strip, so they're not going to be the ones leading, say, a restarting of the war. On the flip side, I think the fact that Middle Eastern nations have been called to basically create something of a buffer zone in Gaza from Israel, and the increasing international pressure that's obviously on Netanyahu, is something of a incentive for them to disarm and for them not to restart the war. Again, it can't happen. Who knows? But again, the overall pattern here is what? Just not wanting to give Trump credit for anything. And I think especially the whinings of progressive commentator Mehdi Hasan do sum it up. Here's what he had to say, by the way. After, again, Trump did a very miraculous thing here, saying, quote, "I love that we live in a world where we're all supposed to now praise Trump for his peacemaking and ignore the fact that at least 20,000 Palestinians, well, that's, unknown, but okay, fine. Let's just say 20,000 Palestinians have been killed on his watch with bombs and bullets and rhetorical support that he supplied to Israel. That's all the race now, right?" Just bitter seething, as I said. Okay, first of all, the war didn't start under Trump. It obviously started under Biden. Now Trump can officially say he's the one that stopped it pretty early on, I should add, into his presidency. And he's just standing here, of course, seething about it. So, no, he's still bad, still a bad guy, wham. But this is something that I actually called and predicted yesterday. I said Palestine activists aren't going to give him credit for a number of reasons. But I think it really boils down to this, right? They're upset they don't get to performatively virtue signal anymore. It's like, what are we going to talk about now, right? How are they going to continue on the grift without, again, Greta Thunberg sailing her sailboat to Gaza and then getting really upset when the IDF said you cannot take your little boat into an active war zone, or like randomly doing videos screaming at Jerry Seinfeld, right? Which apparently these people believed to be genuine or sincere political activism, I've long called out that protest movement as basically a bunch of LARPers who are completely insincere and performative about everything. And that's coming as someone who's not a blanket defender of actually everything Israel has done over the course of the conflict or recent history, right? I think anyone who actually looks into the conflict with a neutral and objective sense of mind will realize, there's complexity and nuance to a lot of aspects of this story, and to just scream, it's genocide, let's attack Jerry Seinfeld, he's supporting genocide, or, on the flip side, say that, okay, we should have total regime change in Iran and maximum war in the Middle East, both sides of that. And part of the reason, by the way, I've been so, trusting of, listen, let Trump do his work on the peace plan, is because foreign policy is not based on slogans, which is interesting because a lot of neocons used to say that to us, but it's true, right? You can't just dictate it off of bumper sticker slogans. There's complexities to navigate, there's nuance to deal with, and actually, as a matter of fact, I personally believe that Trump's Gaza Peace Plan adequately addresses a lot of it. And that is, of course, again, why the performative Gaza activists, as one example, just are so stunned by this, because, again, they fail to comprehend any of that nuance or complexity to the situation. And, of course, what is that really about, right? I'm going to call them the career moralists, right? These people are kind of shocked that no longer will they have the ability to performatively create this scene and play dress up and basically argue to the rest of the world that they're such virtuous, amazing people. We call it virtue signaling for a reason. In reality, one could argue many of these people never really actually cared about Palestine. It's a similar thing to BLM, where again, it's a public opportunity to cosplay as some type of revolutionaries and post pictures on Instagram showing how great of people they are to the rest of the world, ultimately for attention or whatever else, right? So a lot of ridiculous stuff we've seen there. Of course, Mehdi Hasan is further going on and saying, this is actually my biggest fear and most obvious risk with this whole thing. There's nothing and no one to stop Netanyahu and Israel from resuming the war and genocide once they get all the hostages back and Trump has his Nobel Peace Prize and has moved on from this. That's Mehdi Hasan's second response. Notice, by the way, not one single bit of, hey, I give Trump credit for this. It's just he's still a bad genocidal guy and the war is going to continue no matter what. Which, again, first of all, I would argue that the way the deal is structured is basically meant to dissuade in your argument, Netanyahu, from this. But even if that's not the case, I'd further like to point out, Mehdi, that even if the war starts up later on, okay, I thought the slogan forever, by the way, was ceasefire now. Remember those signs? Ceasefire in Gaza, ceasefire in Gaza. Now you have a ceasefire in Gaza and you're saying, well, but things could happen in the future. Okay, if these people and these civilians are struggling, which I don't deny they genuinely are, and it's a really brutal and callous situation there, isn't a little bit of immediate relief a good thing? Shouldn't you be celebrating that instead of, just bitterly seething about Trump about it? Well, pretty interestingly, I do want to show you a video of the actual civilians in Gaza, unlike the Palestine activists in America who think they're such amazing, virtuous people, celebrating and chanting Donald Trump's name. So thankful, yes, that the nightmare they've been living under has been ended by the real pro-peace president and not the fake performative peace activist. Take a listen. The most telling contrast that you will ever see on this issue. I'm reminded of the famous quote of Teddy Roosevelt on The Man in the Arena, which paraphrased basically means, there's a lot of people who sit around and criticize, but it's the person who's ultimately in the arena, right, actually doing the things that deserves the credit and the glory of the situation. A lot of people are just going to stand around from the outside and just scream. And that's exactly, by the way, what you're witnessing right now. Trump is the man in the arena. He's doing something. The critics, the career seethers, the people like Mehdi Hasan who have built nothing, they've done nothing of serious note in their lives, they're insignificant in the grand scheme of things, are resentful over that very fact and obviously not very happy because of it. Now, that said, here's where the situation starts to shift. Once the details become utterly apparent that, Trump pulled off something very good here, very historic, very monumental, take a listen here as CNN's Abby Phillip decides to give him a little bit of credit for once, but I also want to show you the excuses made by Democrat Congressman Jared Goldman in this clip because the copium, again, is off the charts, but take a listen.
That this was not doable when President Biden was in office.
I think the biggest problem that the President Biden had is there was no pressure from Qatar, from Turkey, from Egypt. They were actually facilitating in many ways what was going on. And that is really ultimately how it all came together.
So, but I think by saying that, it's sort of an acknowledgement Trump has changed that dynamic.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think
absolutely. He's clearly.
I don't know how he,
changed
and I think there's a lot that remains to learn about what prompted that change. But I do agree, yes, somehow, some way that changed.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is what you call excuse making on the highest degree. According to the Democrats, the reason why Joe Biden, Genocide Joe, by the way, the reason why Genocide Joe could not get peace in Gaza was because, according to him, Qatar, Turkey, and the other Middle Eastern nations would not come in and broker peace negotiations. That's an interesting argument, but to which I say to it, yeah, and Qatar and Turkey are military allies of the United States. Which is to say what? If that's the case, then why didn't Genocide Joe go to Turkey and go to Qatar and get them on board? Because, ladies and gentlemen, it's no exact secret, according to Jared Goldman, by the way, why in the year 2025, these countries did a complete 180 and suddenly became a million times more active in this stuff. It's because Trump has been asking them to do so and getting them involved, by the way. Remember how Trump recently took a diplomatic trip to the Middle East? Something that a lot of people criticized, that's saying, he's sucking up to the Qataris and the Saudis and they're bad and all this stuff. And the conservative media is being paid by Qatar and all this stuff. No, that was a major component of it. Do you understand now? A big reason he did that is because he understood how diplomacy actually works. And he understood in order to get peace in Gaza, we're going to need the other Gulf states around Israel to agree to some type of peacekeeping and redevelopment and rebuilding plan. It's almost like, ladies and gentlemen, Donald Trump, the guy who they've said for years is just this deranged hothead and he doesn't understand anything, and little rocket man, remember Hillary Clinton basically saying that we would be in nuclear war and all this stuff. No, actually, he understands diplomacy a lot better than the political class of America representing Joe Biden ultimately did. There's your answer. It's that simple, right? However he did it, whether it was through just pure diplomacy or the fact that the oil sheiks have more respect for Trump because he's a strong leader, I don't know. But the point is what? He got it done. Democrats didn't. Why is that? Because Democrats cannot govern. Democrats suck at foreign policy. They suck at domestic policy. The story goes on. You know that, ladies and gentlemen. Now, that said, take a listen here on MSNBC as well, as this presidential historian, who, by the way, is an anti-Trump figure, is forced once again to give Trump total credit for what truly is indeed a miraculous and impressive situation. Take a listen.
One of the things about honesty and citizenship and a sense of, I would say, maturity about what people in a democracy should do is, even if someone with whom you disagree about 99 things does the 100 really well, you should say so, because that's what intellectual honesty is. And so all credit to President Trump and his, as you say, unconventional team. But if he takes an unconventional team, that's fine, right? I remember once asking the senior President Bush after something terrible had happened. It's a sign of something that I can't remember what it was after he'd been president. Something had happened in the Middle East. And I said, this is a man who spent decades dealing with this. I said, Mr. President, do you think this ever gets resolved? And he said, God, I don't know. That's what one of the most experienced diplomatic presidents in American history thought, is that it was an unknowable thing.
Yeah, well, building off of his point, if you still needed proof in 2025 that the so-called experts don't really know what they're talking about or what they're doing, that the institutions and careerists and bureaucrats in our society actually are just like not that good at this and they do not warrant your blind social trust, there you go. As he admits right there, the so-called unconventional team of President Trump, which includes people like Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, literally just like, if I'm not mistaken, he's just a former business partner and friend of Trump, has no actual like historic connection to foreign policy or diplomacy, went and got that done when the careerists, when the establishment were unable to. Yeah. It's almost like you needed the so-called unconventional team, because what's been conventional in America for the past several decades does not have a great track record to write home about itself, does it, right? What is conventionality in the, like, ever since I've been born, for instance? I was born in 2003. War, constant failures of diplomacy, right? Iraq, Libya, Syria, now more recently, Ukraine, Russia, obviously Afghanistan, all of these things. Yeah. Funny how that works. That said, let us show you now a 2-minute compilation as basically the entire liberal media is forced to confront this very real reality, saying things like, quote, he's pulled off something here that many presidents before him failed to do. Interesting, right? Take a listen.
Make no mistake, it looks like President Trump has actually pulled off something here that many presidents before him have failed to do.
Just need to underscore what an enormous moment this is for so many people in this region, for the people of Gaza who have endured 2 years of war, for the families of these 48 remaining hostages who have endured 2 years of absolute agony. This is a watershed moment.
We've heard it again and again from a number of people today, really giving credit to President Trump for getting this deal over the finish line. What are you hearing from your sources with regard to President Trump's role in getting both parties to sign off on at least the first phase of this peace plan?
Well, certainly this is an enormous moment for the world, but also for this administration, a big win for the president, who has been very personally involved in this, Lindsay.
Is a major accomplishment for President Trump, something that he's been really trying to work toward. There's been a lot of critics and questioning of whether or not he could pull off sort of negotiating and working to try to get all these sides together. Of course, there were a lot of nations involved. So this is, of course, not just a victory for President Trump, but really a number of Arab nations, Hamas, and of course, Israel. But this is really huge news, and the president, of course, announcing it online.
So what do you make of what the president has said in a social media post, that they've signed off on the first phase of the peace plan? What does that mean to you?
Anderson, momentous day. There's not much good news in the world. This is great news. I am trying to hold it together, honestly. I've worked on this issue a very long time.
Israel, make no mistake, this is a huge night, potentially the end of the nightmare. For the people of Gaza, this is going to be an enormous relief. For the people of Israel, potentially the end of a 2-year-long nightmare.
And for these families still waiting for the remaining hostages who are still alive to come home, this has been an agonizing wait. And of course, the families who will get the remains of loved ones who died while in captivity.
Ding, ding, ding. Well, I guess they had to admit it at some point. So with that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.